This is the 5-minute guide to the IRN Potemkin, a pre-dreadnought battleship of the Imperial Russian Navy.
The Potemkin was a ship designed for Russia's Black Sea Fleet. With a number of separate fleets to keep up to strength and less budget than some of the other navies, the Russians at this point in time tended to build a number of single ships as often as they did classes of similar ships, and so this particular vessel was a one-off. Initially, the ship was supposed to be an update of the Peresvet class, but this class used long-range but slightly less powerful 10-inch guns instead of the more standard 12-inch weapons. In the narrow confines of the Black Sea, the heavier firepower was thought to be the better deal, so instead the ship was ordered as an improved version of the battleship Tre Kronor instead. The improvements would incorporate a taller bow to prevent water coming over the main deck, a 9-inch belt of Krupp cemented armour, and new Belleville boilers, although minor design changes continued to be made during the building period that ultimately slowed down the ship's construction. The ship was started in 1898, launched in 1900, and sent for sea trials in 1903, although she wasn't fully operational until 1905, when the last gun turret finally arrived. Slightly over her design weight at just under 13,000 tons, she was about average size for a ship of the period she was designed in, but slightly smaller than many pre-dreadnoughts coming into service by the time she was actually operational. She was also slower than average, with a top speed of just over 16 knots. The main battery consisted of 4 12-inch guns mounted in the usual pre-dreadnought layout of 1 twin turret forward and 1 aft. These guns were quite slow firing at only about 1 round every 4 minutes. A secondary battery of 16 6-inch quick-firing guns were mounted in casemates, with a tertiary battery of 14 3-inch guns and 6 47mm guns. A final bit of firepower came in the form of 5 underwater, lightweight 15-inch torpedo tubes, 1 in the bow and 2 on each broadside, with 3 torpedoes for each tube. Over the next 5 years, a number of upgrades were made to the fire control system and gun turrets, improving the rate of fire to 1 round every 40 seconds and losing the bow torpedo tube. During the First World War, a light anti-aircraft armament would be fitted at the expense of the remaining torpedo tubes and the 75mm anti-surface guns. Almost immediately upon her completion in 1905, she would be involved in the incident that made her famous. At the time, the Russian Navy was fighting the Russo-Japanese War, and many of the Black Sea Fleet's best officers and men were transferred to the ships headed for the Pacific to replace losses. This left primarily raw recruits and less capable officers still at home. Unfortunately, the reinforcing units were defeated at the Battle of Tsushima, which then led to morale plummeting amongst the remaining units of the Navy. Taking advantage of this, and ongoing riots and uprisings in the area, the so-called Central Committee of the Social Democratic Organization of the Black Sea Fleet, or more easily the Centralka, began planning for a simultaneous mutiny on all the ships of the fleet. However, things came to a head a little bit early on the 27th of June 1905 during gunnery practice, when many of the men on board the Potemkin refused, relatively reasonably I must say, to eat borscht that was made from rotten meat infested with maggots. The ship's second-in-command apparently thought this was a perfectly adequate foodstuff and threatened to shoot crew members who refused the so-called food, but was himself killed after he mortally wounded one of the mutiny's leaders. The mutineers then went on to kill 7 of the Potemkin's 18 officers, including the captain, and captured a nearby torpedo boat, the Ismail. The resulting committee of mutineers decided to sail for Odessa flying a red flag, and arrived amidst a general strike and some rioting, although they then rather unhelpfully refused to actually land any armed sailors to help their supposed comrades, preferring to wait instead for the other battleships of the Black Sea Fleet, who in theory should also have mutinied. The government sent 2 squadrons to Odessa to either force the Potemkin's crew to give up or to be sunk. The first squadron was made up of the battleships Tre Kronor, Devenatsats Apostolov, and Georgy Pobedonosets, and I cannot believe how many times I've had to record that line. But they turned away. The second squadron then arrived with the battleships Rostislav and Sinop, and the acting commander of the Black Sea Fleet ordered the entire fleet to proceed into Odessa. The Potemkin sailed through the combined squadrons without either side actually opening fire. The Devenatsats Apostolov instead attempted to ram the Potemkin and then detonate its magazines, but the captain was stopped by members of his crew. To add even more fun, the Georgi Pobedonosets mutinied and joined the Potemkin for a few hours before loyalist crew members retook control of the ship and ran her aground in Odessa harbour. The Potemkin's crew then decided to sail off to Romania to demand resupplies of food, water and coal. The Romanians, despite having only a single small protected cruiser, refused to do anything of the sort, so the ship sailed off to bully an even smaller settlement in the Crimea, but even here they were refused anything other than food. The mutineers then attempted to steal several barges of coal, but the tiny garrison ambushed and killed or captured 22 of the 30 sailors involved. So it was back to Romania, where the crew were offered asylum if they would disarm themselves and surrender the battleship, which they accepted, albeit trying to scuttle the ship in harbour, where it promptly settled about 6 feet in the water, touched the seabed, and stayed pretty much where it was. The remainder of the Russian fleet showed up and got the ship back, refloated it, and towed it back to Sevastopol for repairs. The ship was then renamed Pantelimon and brought back into service. After a few quiet years, the ship would accidentally ram and sink the submarine Kambala at night in 1909, and then ran aground and suffered damage a couple of years later, finally receiving a complete overhaul and repair to all this in 1912. During the First World War, the ship was assigned to the 1st Battleship Brigade, and during a bombardment mission, this unit was intercepted by the Ottoman battlecruiser Yavuz Sultan Selim, the ex-SMS Goeben, during the Battle of Cape Sarich. Despite it being daytime, fog meant that the capital ships initially didn't actually spot each other. Although several other ships opened fire, managing to hit the Goeben once, the Pantelimon held fire because they couldn't actually see the German ships until after they'd disengaged. In 1915, Yavuz Sultan Selim and several ships of the Turkish Navy raided the Russian port of Odessa, and the Russian battleship squadron sortied to intercept them, but were outrun. The rest of the year consisted of back-and-forth bombardment missions, while the Yavuz tried to alternately intercept or escape them, depending on the balance of power at the time, the situation gradually tipping in favour of the Imperial Russian Navy as the dreadnought Imperatrica Maria entered service. After the February Revolution, the ship was renamed Potemkin Tavrishevsky, and almost a month later was renamed again to Borets za Svobodu. She would be placed in reserve in March 1918, then captured by the Germans in May, handed over to the Allies in December, and then have her engines wrecked in April of 1919 when they left the Crimea as the Bolsheviks advanced, overrunning the White Russians. After changing hands a couple of times, she was eventually scrapped in 1923, although not stricken from the Navy list until 1925, the same year when the famous Soviet film Battleship Potemkin was released, although ironically the original mutiny leaders were various types of socialists and in fact had never wanted anything to do with communism.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to start your query with Q&A if you want to submit a question to the dry dock.